So it's a great pleasure for me to welcome Einat Shetreet. She's a professor at Tel Aviv University. She at the Department of Linguistics, but she holds a PhD in psychology from Tel Aviv University. The topic of her dissertation was verb processing in sentence comprehension. With Nano Friedman as co-supervisor and also Uri Adar. Then she moved to the US. She did a postdoc in Harvard under the supervision of Gennaro Chierchia and Gina Cooperberg. So she's highly integrated also in the psycholinguistics, US-style psychoneurolinguistics. And her investigation focused, I would say, on the interaction between sentence processing and pragmatic inference. And I think that the only fMRI study on scalar implicatures, basically, is...
it was the first, but...
It was the first, now they did others.
There's two or three more.
Two or three more, okay. But the first fMRI study on scalar implicatures was authored by Einat. But I'm also pleased to see that now she's moving from the interaction.
I would take my place here, and then I go off for a minute, and I hope to be back.
Welcome, Andrea. So now she's moving again from the interface between sentence processing and pragmatic inferences to the interface between pragmatic inferences and social factors. And actually, I really like the name of the lab she directs, Language in Social Context, LISC Lab, right? It's a nice name, and if you read the description of the lab, you find pragmatic interpretation, social identity, and the perspective of the lifespan among the main topics of interest. And that's indeed a topic, the topic of today's talk. So really, thank you, Einat, for joining us, and floor is yours.
Thank you for inviting me and taking me down memory lane from the days I did syntax and all the way to pragmatics. Indeed, I'm going back to my origins, and I'm working now with a lot of social psychology. I think I know. Okay, this is working now. Okay. I think I was so excited to talk to you, so I prepared too many slides. But I will try to talk about everything. So please stop me if I'm talking too fast and I'm not being clear. Ask me a question during the talk. We don't have to wait, I think, to the end. I will talk a little bit about speaker-specific language use at the lexical level and social aspects that relate to that. Then I want to take most of our time together to talk about social group effects, because this relates to what we will talk about later on in the lab meeting. If we have time, I don't promise I'll talk about this. I'll show you preliminary results from a new fMRI study that we're doing. Okay, so the first thing I will talk about is a project related to speaker-specific language use. It's led by a PhD student in the lab, which I'm writing. So just a little bit, it's a tiny fraction of his massive work on speaker-specific language use. And when I say speaker-specific language use, I mean some characteristics of the language of a certain speaker, right? So if you constantly call this thing a mountain, characterizes your speech. If I say cup, it characterizes my speech. There is some variation between speakers. And we know from a lot of research that we can recognize this variation and relate it to certain speakers. And this goes in different linguistic levels, phonetic variation, lexical preferences, like I showed you with the naming of the noun and the cup, syntactic preferences, and even pragmatic communication. And like a simple example would be that if you hear my accent, you know that I'm not a native English speaker, right? You can identify this phonetic variation of my speech. Right? When we also know to identify different regions, I'm sure this happens for Italians, it doesn't happen in Israel because it's so tiny, and so on. What we wanted to investigate is, do we generalize this information from the language use of a speaker to other type of information, linguistic and social. So what we did is present our participants with two different speakers that had two different language profiles, specifically naming differences, like the ones that I showed at the beginning. And we had a speaker, a common speaker used. Is there's some echo when there's just
No more.
okay, thank you. The common speaker used favorite words to describe a certain reference, and the uncommon speaker used disfavored words to describe the same reference, right? The cup and the cup, it's the same cup. And the proportion were 80% to 80% or more, and 80% or less for favorite versus disfavored, as we determined by pretest. Right? So we asked participants, we showed them different pictures that could be described by two different words, and they had to choose which word they could. I will quickly say, and I will not tell you about this unless you want me at the end. We also had a condition where the proportion was 60 to 40 because we wanted to see if there's any difference when there's more deviance or less deviance for common language use. Okay. So we had a long task that participants did in 5 steps that were always presented in the same order. The two first steps were some kind of interactive tasks where there were 2 people speaking to each other. One instructed the other which picture to choose between an array of 4. Then we had 3 post-interaction questionnaires that included the generalization question, the things that we care about. So let's go step by step. The first step was the exposure. And in this step, the participants interacted with the simulated confederates, right? Basically bots that we wrote, where both bots instructed the participants which picture to choose by typing a word. So here participants were the matchers. We had one speaker that was the common speaker, the other speaker was the uncommon speaker, and they had 2 separate bots, right? One for each speaker, and it was counterbalance. Okay, so this is the first step. We didn't do any measure, it's just exposure to teach them which speaker uses which words. In the second step, we had participants give the instruction to the simulated confederates. It was the same ones that appeared in the exposure, also in 2 separate plots. And what we tested here is alignment, the alignment effect. So basically, we want to see if we use the words that the confederate used, right? So we want to see if the participants use the word cat with the person that said cat, and use the word feline with the person that said feline. Okay? What I'm showing you here is the odds of using the disfavored word. In blue, we see the uncommon speaker, the speaker that used the disfavored word, and in orange, the common speaker, the person that didn't use that word. Right, and I remember there's very little chance that we will use that word anyway, right? It's 20%. And we see that you can see that the rates are really low for in general for alignment. I think the average is around 25%. But we see a big alignment effect, right? Because there is this big difference between using the disfavored words with the person that produced them, with the uncommon speaker, than when using them with the common speaker, the person that didn't use. Okay, and this is replication of previous studies, which also find relatively low rates of using disfavored words, but a big effect, big difference between two different speakers. We also wanted to know if our participants really knew which speaker produced which word, because 25% is really low. So we also did a post-interaction questionnaire just to determine whether they learned which speaker said which word, and we asked them about each word, whether the speaker used it for the two speakers. Right, so we asked whether feline was produced by only one speaker and whether feline was produced by a medium. They had to say yes or no, and we did this fancy analysis, signal detection analysis, which looks at hits and false alarms. And we compared the D prime measure that comes out of this analysis to 0, which means there was no learning. And we can see that this is a big effect, right? So even though participant didn't produce the disfavored word with the uncommon speaker, they knew that he likes to say feline. Okay? So we have this dissociation between alignment, which is the common measure in the literature, and actually making the association between speaker and the languages. Okay, now let's go into the more interesting things, which is to see if we can generalize what we learned about the speaker to other things. So the first thing we tested is a linguistic generalization. We tested 3 different things. We had the novel disfavored words that were not used in the actual experiment, and new favorite words, of course. We had favorite and disfavored adjective ordering preferences, right? So this is at the phrase level. So whether you say a dot between small triangle is a disfavored order. I think I am so not sensitive anymore to yeah, but I think it's wrong. And we also had canonical and non-canonical word order as a sentence. Okay, let's see what people did. Here we're looking at assigning the disfavored structure or word to the different speakers. Right, we ask them hypothetically, would this person use this structure, or would this person use this word? And you can see that there was no effect for the phrase level and the sentence level, so they didn't do any generalization to those structures, but there is a big effect for the lexical level, for the new disfavored words. The disfavored words that were not included in the exposure were thought to be connected to the uncommon speaker and not to the common speaker. Right, so basically, people generalize at the same level.
Can I ask a very further question?
Sure.
As for the first, I mean, was there any match of the number of syllable adjectives? What I'm alluding to,
Here,
yes. To the preference, when you conjoin
It's
to
like the-
proper noun, that you normally you have the shorter ones first, the longer ones second. Did you match also for that, or?
I think most words in Hebrew are just that we used, it was all in Hebrew.
Okay,
I didn't
so
say
that
that.
was easy because.
It was very,
Yeah.
they're very similar.
Yeah.
So it's gadol, kachol,
Yeah,
mushbach.
yeah. By syllable typically,
Yes.
yeah, okay, so.
And we have data from a previous study that looks at the favorite orders in Hebrew, which are
Okay,
not. It's not robust.
because, it's just to avoid the interference to intelligence, so, metrical.
No, we
things.
think that there is some phonological effect there in general,
Okay,
but not
but not here.
in determining the preference,
Okay.
but not in determining. I'm going, okay, but not in determining the differences between the speakers, right? So
Yeah.
it's just in determining which word order is preferred, but then you would maybe assign it differently to different speakers, and we didn't find that.
Thanks.
Can I ask a methodological question? I was curious, why did you choose that phrasing to ask the question? How is it likely that, and not how likely is it to that the person will decide?
First of all, this was in Hebrew, so I'm not,
Yes, sure, because I'm translating the.
what did you want to?
Why asking a yes, no question with the phrasing
Oh,
that
I see.
it looks to me that it tends to a positive answer, let's say, because is it likely, not is it unlikely, or is it likely?
That this person will use this.
We use, and why not continue?
I think it's weird that in general, today's is it unlikely, right? That's always a bit weird, that's probably why we use likely, but you say why yes or no.
Mhm. Maybe there's a very.
No, I don't have a good answer. I don't think we did so for the signal detection analysis, we have to have yes or no, but I don't think we did this here. So
Maybe we will find
something more sensitive, possibly. We're doing this a lot now, so we can check if it happens when we do a rating. Thank you. Okay. A little detour. So in the actual experiment, the big one that is, by the way, was just published. We just proved it 2 weeks ago.
That's why
There-
I was not finding it.
Okay.
Already searched it, couldn't find it.
So, yeah, it's just like out of the. So in that study, we had each word repeat 4 times. So it's really just very obvious. We just ran now 2 new experiments. They have slightly different properties, but in both of them, we had 1 repetition per word. We can see here, right? So this is the odds of saying matching the disfavored word to the common speaker is higher than to the uncommon speaker, higher than the common speaker. Right? So even when we don't use this very obvious design, we still get this generalization effect with the lexicon. We only test. Okay. Now let's look at the final step, which try to see if we do social generalizations based on language use. And we had 5 different questions, and here we had ratings. Okay, so we asked how many books this person read, how likely that they were not born in Israel, how likely that they were autistic, how many friends they had, and how cooperative they were. Okay, and we classified these two questions as relating to the language competence, right? So reading more books gives you richer language, and or being born in a different country says that you will not be a competent speaker. What you see here in, do you see it in, it's orange, but do you see it pink? Orange, okay, so the orange,
Salmon, technically.
huh?
So salmon.
Salmon. The orange is the common speaker, and the blue is the teal, is the uncommon speaker. And you can see here that uncommon speaker is perceived to have read more books, but there is no effect for the native language, right? So they were both perceived as being born in Israel. But it seems that language does have an effect on language competence. And then we have like more really social questions. You see that the common speaker is less likely to be considered autistic. It's considered to have more friends. And it's considered to be more cooperative than the person using this speaker report. First thing I showed you is that we replicated the alignment finding, and that there was really high rates of associating a speaker with the language that he used. But the more interesting stuff are the social consequences or not linguistic and social consequences of language use that I showed you. We saw linguistic generalization here only at the word level. So possibly we need more evidence to make generalization at other linguistic levels. And we know that we do a lot of predicting in language processing, and it's possible that we can use this linguistic generalization to make prediction in a much broader sense, right? Not just at a specific context, but also just to think this person likes those words. We're actually doing, starting to run an ERP study to look at this effect to see really if we see this prediction, because the N400 is a really good measure of linguistic prediction. So next one, we can keep going. Okay, and I also showed you that there are social generalizations, right? So we think that people that are weird use this favorite word are maybe weird, they have less friends, they're autistic. But I want to focus on the cooperativeness question. So we asked people if the bot was cooperative. Now, these people were the first one to instruct language, and they used whichever language they wanted, right? And then the participant gave their response. So normally in alignment studies, they do it the other way around, and they talk about some kind of conversational impacts, where if the participant produces a certain word, it is expected that the person that he talks to will continue using that word. Here, we didn't have that situation, so there was no pact to break. So it could be weird that we see that the uncommon speaker is perceived as less cooperative. What we think going on here is that favorite words are just some kind of a generalized convention in language, and when you don't use them, you're breaking. Okay. I'm gonna try to be quick now and show you whether truly that social a priori social knowledge also migrates generalization. I was hoping to finish this part by now. So thanks. I'll focus on foreignness as a social cue, because we know that foreign speakers are perceived as less accurate, less credible, and more importantly, that we represent their linguistic input in less detail. So maybe this will affect somehow the generalizations that we can use. Again, we have the same design with the two speakers with two different language profile and the proportion of 80 and 20 with their lexical preferences. But this time we gave our uncommon speaker different names. Common Israeli name to indicate a native speaker, common American name to indicate a person with an American descent, and a common Russian name to indicate a person with Russian descent, where Americans have positive stereotype in Israel and Russians have negative stereotypes in Israel. This was like Yoni, Josh, and Evgeny or something like that, or Boris, and for the girls it was Adi, Emma, and Olga, I think, something like that. So this is a very delicate cue, and we did the same thing. And I'll jump straight to the results. So this is the alignment results, and remember here I'm looking at the odds of producing the disfavored word with the two speakers. And we see again that there is alignment effect, such that they produce the disfavored word more with the uncommon speaker here in the orange bars, and more for the uncommon speaker than for the common. Okay, so it's the same thing as we saw before.
To be clear, because maybe I think the uncommon speaker here is the name associated with negative stereotype.
The uncommon speaker here is this, we have like three conditions for uncommon speakers. So the uncommon speaker in all of these three conditions is the person that used language with the words that were preferred in only 20% of the time. So this is common for all of the ones that are considered uncommon. The common speaker here was always Israeli. So it's only that we only manipulated the uncommon speaker. And the uncommon speaker should be in a condition where you have an Israeli name, an American name, or a Russian. Okay? So we see an alignment effect for all the conditions, but it's smaller for the American condition compared to the other condition. It's smaller because of the using the disfavored word more with the common speaker than in the other condition. Okay, so what we think is going on here is Americans have positive stereotypes, and so whatever they say is becoming more favored in a way. So this makes the disfavored words more favored in the American name condition, and then they're produced more. In the detection here, there was no difference between the different conditions, so everyone learned to associate his favorite words with the uncommon speaker and the favorite words with the common speaker.
But it was done, sorry, but it was done in Hebrew.
Excuse me?
The experiment was done in Hebrew.
Yes.
And so this positive bias towards the US origin generalizes also to
Hebrew.
the use of
Yes.
Hebrew language.
Yes. Whatever they say is like,
They're better
oh, wow, they're better than me.
in speaking Hebrew.
Yeah. If they use it, then I should use it too.
Ah,
Sort
okay.
of thing, I think. Okay, next question here was the linguistic generalization. Again, there was no generalization for the adjective ordering. There was a generalization for the lexical choices in all of the conditions similarly. For the sentence structure, we saw generalization for the Russians only, right? So what we think happens here is that we just assume that they speak in a weirder way, more generally. As I said before, adjective ordering is not so robust in Hebrew, so I think this is a different effect. Okay, I assume you can't see it very well, but can I move this thing for the Zoom?
Sorry to
Sure.
Katie, I don't think you need to use USSR.
Yeah, no, it's just, it's in the making. So this is all new results. Yeah, okay. Thank
It
you.
sounds fun.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so we'll look at three questions for the social generalization. And here it's more complicated than before, because now I'm only plotting here the uncommon speaker, but in two different conditions, with the language exposure and without the language exposure. So we wanted to say, just saying to someone Boris makes him be having less friends because he has some kind of negative spirit. Okay, so we wanted to see how the language affected also the social aspect. We see here that for the books question, how many books did they read? There's no effect across the different names, right? And we see the effect that we saw with the Israelis. Basically, the more you speak it as his favorite language, the more books you read. For the native speaker question, were they born in Israel? Or were they born not in Israel? We see for Israelis, they were always considered to be born in Israel. The Russians were always considered to be born not in Israel, but the Americans have this effect where if you hear them speaking a disfavored language, they're considered to be born in Israel, but if you don't know their language, their American name says that they were born abroad. And for the how many friends do they have questions, we see that the disfavored language affected the conditions, the Israeli condition and the Russian condition, but not the American. Again, probably through those positive stereotypes because they have more friends in general, even if they use this favorite language, right? We also saw that to begin with, they maybe thought it was not that disfavored because they use it themselves in their language stage. So we'll skip over the summary unless someone has questions, which talked about all of this before, I think. I'll skip this too, but you can ask me about this afterwards because theory of mind is involved. Theory of mind is involved. And I'll skip quickly to the main event today, which is looking at social group effects. And this is a project by Eva Professor who just started her PhD. Still done all of this work. I'm assuming we all know that pragmatic processing is linked to theory of mind and to executive functions. right? So we see correlations between scores in theory of mind tasks and scores in executive function tasks and pragmatic inferences. We see the evidence from brain activations. I do want to focus about on social groups. So social groups are categories like gender, religion, political view, etc., that we use to define our self-identities. Right, so I'm a woman, I'm a professor, I'm a liberal. And one thing that comes up with it is group membership. So everyone that belongs to the same group as me, all of the women in the crowd or in my group, on that respect, and all the men are in my outgroup. And then it goes like, if you're a liberal, you're in my in-group. If you're conservative, you're in my group. And this group membership has many consequences and what happens in our day-to-day life. So we see in-group bias. We favor people from our in-group. We find them more trustworthy. We think more positive things about them compared to our group members. More importantly to me is what happens in the outgroup. So there are some cognitive consequences for interacting with people from the outgroup. First of all, it is hard for us to mentalize their minds. For people that are in my in-group, I sort of know how they think. I can be in their heads. For people from my outgroup, some people say that I don't even attribute mind to them, right? And we see, for example, that we get lower scores in read the mind in the eye test, which is a very conventional theory of mind test. We get lower scores when we are looking at people from an outgroup, right? For example, Black people and white people. We also see some general cognitive impairment when we interact with people from an outgroup. For example, after interaction with the outgroup members, we get lower scores in Stroop tests. And they explain it by saying that when we talk to people from an outgroup, we ask to sort of regulate our stereotypes. And this takes a lot of cognitive effort, and therefore I don't have enough cognitive effort to do these other tests.
Excuse me, methodologically, how do they measure the reading mind in the eyes test with respect to the outgroup? Do they say that the faces are out?
I know, I don't know all the details, but I know one test, for example, that just showed white people, faces of Black people, and that's harder to read, for example.
Okay.
Okay. Another thing that I will just quickly mention, because I will use it as a manipulation, is that the effects are modulated by the level of group identification, specifically the cognitive effects. We do still see input bias for low identification. So when I am interacting with someone from a group that is well-defined and I feel very strongly about, like politics in the US, for example, it's very high identification. You see very robust effects. But when we look at groups that have no impact really, right? They say everyone to the left of here is in the dolphin groups, and everyone to the right of here is in the lions group. It's what we call a minimal group because it's just based on not really anything, right? Arbitrary properties. In those cases, we lose the cognitive impairment because now we don't have to regulate, for example, for stereotypes. We know each other, so we know how to mentalize each other, but the group effect still maintains, which is also needed. Okay, so as I said, we know that cognitive abilities are linked to linguistic interpretation, pragmatic processing. Now I showed you that the speaker identity group membership affects cognitive ability. So we suggest that speaker identity will affect pragmatic processing through cognitive abilities. And that's what I'll try to show you. There are some indications that speaker identity does affect linguistic interpretation. And so this is, for example, Andrea's study on imprecision in nerd people and chill people, where nerd people are expected to interpret numbers more precisely. And we see this also with foreign speakers. All of this stuff are related to stereotypes and to language competence. And before I show you the cognitive effects, I want to show you that we can see speaker identity effects on cases where you have a neutral content. And this will be my first time, and then my second time will be showing you the cognitive effects. So for neutral linguistic information, we chose scalar implicatures. This is my specialty. Also, it's very conventional. It happens with minimal contacts. It's specifically the ones used with some. It's logical language. You shouldn't see any effects, right? In fact, it's the first time I submitted this for funding. People told me you will see no effects because it's so logical, it's so conventionalized, so regular. So we think this is appropriate to test neutral linguistic information. Yeah, it's conventional and minimal. We also know that there's no difference between US political groups, which is the group that we will use. And we didn't use, we used like this figures that have no world knowledge requirements. So very neutral. And in those scalar implicature tasks, what we see is in the critical trials, we show people this image and we say some of the foxes have ribbons on their tails, where all of them have ribbons on their tails. And we ask them to say if the statements in the picture are matching or not matching. When people say matching, we take it to mean that they gave a logical response, so they did not derive the scalar implicature. When they say not matching, we take it to mean that they derived it. But I remind you that I said that in intergroup interactions, there should be a cognitive impairment. And if so, we could have people interacting with outgroup members who have less resources to derive the scalar implicatures, and therefore we are supposed to see low rates of pragmatic responses, of not matching responses when interacting with it. We tested it in 2 experiments with US political affiliation. This is high identification group, and in a minimal group, which is low identification. And we expect an organization. Okay, so this was our basic design. We had 3 between subject conditions, a control condition. This is the baseline. We didn't say anything about groups. And then we had the in-group and the out-group conditions, and they look like this. You will communicate with Michael, who's a Republican, and if you were a Republican, you were in the in-group condition. If you were a Democrat, you were in the out-group condition. And we had an indication of the group also in the actual stimuli. Okay, so we had political affiliation also in the actual stimuli. Okay, so let's see what we see. Here I'm showing you the rates of pragmatic responses, basically choosing not matching. in the control group, the in-group and the out-group. You can see, as we expected, the out-group had lower rate of pragmatic responses compared to the control, but also the in-group. So what's going on here? Okay. So I think that we should remember that we assume that when we choose the matching response, this means that the participants didn't derive the implicature. But another thing that could happen there is that they're just being charitable, right? It could be that they derived the implicature, but then they canceled it. Now, in that group, there's no reason to be charitable, right? But in the in-group, there is an in-group bias. I want to be charitable, I want to say yes, right? Whatever they said is great. So maybe likely to say that the sentence in the picture match. To be nice to you. Okay, so basically the effect that we saw in experiment 1 is come from that. But it could also come from the fact that they were just simply playing in a group setting and not in an individual setting like we normally do in assignment settings. So,
sorry, if you go back to the results, the in-group was lower.
even lower,
I was a chance.
there were chances.
They don't care. If it's true or false, if it's chance.
I think they care,
Well,
but I don't know.
No,
I can't do, right? Something weird is going on. Based on our hypothesis at the beginning, something weird is going on with the in-group.
Well,
Okay.
it might be that you're saying the same thing in the sense that they're in my group. I would say yes to whatever they say.
Right.
So it's chance level in the sense that either they are right or they're wrong. I don't express my judgment, and I.
No, but here I'm only plotting the critical condition. So in the non-critical, in the control condition, where there is like a definite yes or a definite no, there is no difference. Okay, so it's only here.
In the critical condition.
Only where there is some leeway, please. Okay, I'll go to what we've done next and then do something extra and maybe convince you that my hypothesis is right. Okay, so what we did is, I mean, we planned anyway to look at minimal groups, but this was a perfect test case for us. Because I remind you that we think the in-group effect is maintained. That's what studies show, and the out-group effect is mitigated. So basically, if it's just the group settings, then we shouldn't see any differences between in-group and out-group, also in the minimal group. But if it is what I'm thinking, and this is the in-group bias that drives the reduction in the pragmatic rate in the in-group, then it should be maintained here. But we should see mitigation there. And so now we told them we asked them a few questions, and then we told them you're a dolphin or you're a kangaroo, I don't remember. And what we see now is only the effect in the in-group. It's not completely true because we do see something in the out group, but it's in reaction times. So we do see still some hardship in the out group condition, but it's mitigated. So we think that, I mean, we see negative effects in both the in-group and the out-group, but we think that they're coming from different sources. For the in-group condition, we think that it's from an in-group bias effect, and for the out-group, we think it's a cognitive impairment. I'll try to show you another experiment, maybe convince you that this hypothesis is right. When we try to look at find some tasks where we can find the outgroup negative effect without taking the hit. And what we did is look at a rating task. So we, instead of asking them a yes/no question, basically, matching, not matching, where we expect a yes bias for the in-group based on the in-group bias. Here, we think that if you're interacting with an in-group member, you derive the implicator. So you will give the rating that is part, you will not give the rating that is matching, because you know it's not true, but you will go, say, up to 4. But if you didn't derive the implicator at all, you'll give this matching response. Okay? So I think there should be some differentiation between the in-group and the out-group in this case. And that's what we see, right? So here I'm plotting just to be consistent, the rate of pragmatic responses. So everything that is not the matching. And we see no difference between the control and the in-group, but the out-group has lower rates of pragmatic responses. Basically, they have more matching, pure matching responses. I also want to show you another thing, which is just preliminary data on mouse tracking. And basically, the path that we're taking to arrive at the response should be somewhat indicative to our cognitive effort. The smoother the path, the easier it is to make a decision. Okay, so let's look at the different groups. In green, I see the control group. And here, so the mouse was placed under the scale. They had to go up and then make their choices. We're plotting going around direction. Okay, we're plotting the path to giving a pure logical response. So, okay, the matching response. And look at the green line, it's very smooth going to the matching response. In the outgroup condition, they go up for some reason above the scale, go down, and then it goes. For the in-group, it's just like going around and around, right? So you look at this measurement of axis flips, how many times you change the direction of the map, and it's much, much higher for the in-group compared to the altitude.
Is that plot of the mean?
Yes, all of the groups. Okay, so basically you can see that it's hard for them to make the decision at the beginning, but also even at the end. They're having a hard time. We think that this is indicative for some kind of cognitive effort for the people to give the pure logical response. We think it means that they have derived the implicator and they're trying to cancel it. Right, so in this task, we were able to isolate the outgroup effects, and I think we showed some support for the fact that the process for the in-group is more complicated, supports what I didn't say it, two-step processing, right? So deriving the implicature and then still accepting the logical response despite the fact that we know that the pragmatic response is correct, or whatever, we have right to pragmatic response. Okay, so overall, maybe now I was faster than I thought. So we saw that for the in-group condition, in 2 different tasks with high group identification, there was a cognitive impairment, lower rate of pragmatic interpretations. And for the low identification group, there was a longer reaction times. So it's see, we think that there is some impairment in deriving the ligatures. And of course, it's modulated by the level of group identification. For the E-group condition, the effect was test dependent. So in the binary test, regardless of group identification, we saw lower rates of pragmatic response. For the rating task, we saw more complicated path, right? So was more cognitively effortful to arrive at the logical interpretation in this case. So I think I showed you that first of all, I definitely showed you that there's speaker identity effects on even neutral cases, right? And I hope I also showed you that this is more inherited with the output conditions. But now I want to show you the main event and establish my claim that cognitive abilities have something to do with this. So our first candidate was theory of mind. As I said, theory of mind is involved in pragmatic processing, and we know that it's hard to represent the minds of people from their group. And we know from the literature that there is a correlation between scores in theory of mind tests and the rates of pragmatic responses in a truth assessment test of skill and ligatures. Right, so the higher scores you get, the more pragmatic responses you get. Right, and this is, I think, well established. This is what we expect to see in people. What about the other groups? So for the out group, I told you that we have hard time to represent their minds. So we think there would be will be even harder for people that have lower capacity of theory of mind. Right, so people that normally get lower scores in theory of mind tests will have a hard time to overcome this intergroup settings, and therefore we will see a stronger effect, right? A stronger correlation between theory of mind and scalar ligature, the rate of pragmatic responses in scalar ligature. For the in-group condition, right? For in-group people, we have no problem representing their mind. So maybe they should look like control. But I told you that they also do this in-group by thing, and they use a charity more than control, right? And this is a process that is not related to theory of mind. So here we may see a weaker effect. Okay, so the next experiment we did with combined group of Israelis and British. For British, it was Brexit. For Israelis, it was for the war during the big protests. Was pro and against government then, but then and it was basically the same thing. Basically the same setting, just changed the symbol. And we added at the end redefining the 9 tasks in Hebrew for the Hebrew speakers, in English for the English speakers, and we also told them that this is not related to the other tasks, right? So this should be somewhat distinct. So here is what we see in red, the control, in blue the outgroup, and in green the in-group. So we see in control what we normally see, right? So there's a correlation between the rates of pragmatic responses and the scores in the redefining lines. we see that for the outgroup, you still see this positive correlation, but it's stronger, as we expected. And for the in-group, there is no effect.
It's not negative, it's not inverse, it's just not.
No correlation. This is all. Okay, so first of all, again, it shows a dissociation between outgroup and in-group, right? It really, I think, demonstrates that the effect comes from different reasons, even though at the beginning we thought, oh, it's something very similar going on in these two groups. This also shows that even the processing is different. And it goes in the direction of our hypothesis that theory of mind does mediate this effect of speaker identity and linguistic interpretation. Okay, so just to sum this up, as I said, we saw this negative effect in outgroup condition, and we start with, again, very neutral content not related to stereotypes in a very, very conventionalized pragmatic phenomenon. Right, and this relates to what we will talk about later. We think that this effect will be even stronger for more complex pragmatic phenomena. And like irony, and we think that it is mediated by general cognitive ability. By the way, maybe not only theory of mind, right? We still need to test it with executive functions and other tasks of theory of mind, not just this one simple task. And we still think that the stereotypes do have a role, but maybe this is always in the background. Okay, I don't know if I have more time, or should I stop now, or I...
Well, you have no more than 10 minutes, because then we have to leave a little bit of discussion. But so if you want to...
So do you want to choose between MRI and theory of, going back to theory of mind, or...
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so this is just a very, very preliminary result from Gabriel Brown's PhD work on social and linguistics factors in interpretation and use assessment. And he wanted to know how trust affects narrative interpretation. And he tested this through neural synchronization. So basically, intersubject correlation is this method that we use to know how correlated we are in interpreting things, right? So when we look at this Rorschach drawing, right? So we all have the same perception of it, like visual perception. So our minds, our brains should be highly correlated in areas that process visual features. Okay? I was told that most people that look at it see two people holding hands. If they do, their brains will be correlated. Me, on the other hand, I see a face of an animal. I wonder what it says about me, right? I don't know what you see. It means that me and them will not be correlated, right? Because our interpretation is different to the same stimuli, right? In higher cognitive areas, we'll see less correlation than in the lower level perception areas. Okay? We will see correlation. We will see correlation if we have the same interpretation of this thing, but not if we don't. And this is basically the idea of intersubject correlation. We look at we give participants some kind of stimuli. They see it, they listen to it, and then we look at different areas, and we look to see if there's correlation between the subjects. Okay, so as I said, Gabriel wanted to know if some social factors, here trust, affects the way that we interpret narrative. And I thought that if we trust the speaker, if we think he's telling the truth, we will be highly correlated because we will just interpret what he says. If we think he's telling a lie, we'll try to find alternative interpretations, and then we will be less correlated. Okay? He also included some kind of a narrative factor where we had one narrative with one very obvious alternative interpretation, and one narrative that had many different alternative interpretations. So it was all courtroom scenario where someone questioned the witness in the one silent alternative. It was some kind of story of a person that was accused of stealing a computer, right? And then the alternative would be he did not steal. The other narrative talked about some fire that happened in a restaurant, and it had many reasons that it was possible. I think it would be intentional. It could have been like some kind of malfunction in the equipment. The idea here is when you have one salient alternative interpretation in the live condition, you will most probably be correlated with other people. But when there are many different possible alternative interpretations, everyone will choose a different interpretation, and we'll see less, the correlation will be weaker.
In the light condition.
In the live condition.
Not in
The idea is that in the truth condition, we'll in general see high correlation. This is not what happened. But this is a reasonable, I think, hypothesis, right?
If you have only one interpretation, then you can. If you admit that there are more than one silent alternative interpretation in the truth condition, right? Should you?
Either way, you think it would be higher in the truth condition than in the light condition. But it could be that you will not see any correlation, not in the truth condition and not in the light condition, right? That's a possibility.
Yes.
But if you do see high correlation, it should probably be the truth condition where everyone aligned to the same truth. That's what we thought.
Yeah.
Okay. There was a context where we basically told people whether to trust or not to trust the speaker. Then they heard one of the narratives, and then we had questions just to know that they actually really remember that they were supposed not to believe or to believe the speaker, to know that they listened to the story properly, etc. And then they heard the other context. So if they were in the trust context in the first narrative, they were now in distrust context, and then the other narrative. Then we only care about the narrative condition. So here for the lower level audio area should be high correlation. And then for the interpretation, we'll see different interesting things. But we expected again higher correlation in the interpretation. So this is again very preliminary results. We don't have all the subjects, but I think it's 40 people, and we planned for 44, so we're almost there. This is the model that looked at the correlations of brain activity and tried to predict in which condition the person was, either the truth condition or the trust condition or the distrust condition. It was some kind of leave one out model. Okay? So, and you see, it's really great, right? So, but what we see here is like, this is the actual condition, where they were in the truth condition or in the lie condition. And this is what the model predicted, and it's doing really well in both the one alternative and the many alternatives.
Here, the model tried to predict the class of the subject based on the activation in different areas.
I think this is like some kind of overall activation.
Okay.
Okay, overall activation, and it tries to not which narrative, but whether you were supposed to believe the speaker or not. Okay, so this is high level, right? So it's not like what are the auditory features you heard, is whether you were supposed to believe the speaker or not. It's not that, it's not based on the lower auditory region. Okay. And this is the very preliminary results for looking at regions that had high correlations differently in the two conditions for truth and lie, right? So there were many other regions that were correlated, right? For example, the auditory regions, but they were correlated to the same extent in the two conditions. And what we see here is higher correlation for the lie, the distrust condition compared to the truth condition in both narratives, which blew my mind. Okay, and we see it for the one alternative narrative here in the TPJ, right? So I assume most of you should know that TPJ is related to theory of mind. It's a part of the canonical network. I don't want to go into this in very detail because again, it's preliminary results, but Gabriel says that he did this in like a super conservative threshold, so he thinks it will survive. But what we now think is maybe they're trying to understand what the speaker meant to say, what was his actual intended meaning when he was on. Right, and realigning that with like the process of trying to understand, not necessarily the interpretation of what he was trying to say, but in trying to mentalize his mind. In the second narrative, we see activation in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex in regions that were related to ambiguity resolution. So again, this should be taken very carefully because it's not the final analysis, but it could be that they have multiple interpretations and they're trying to choose. And this region is related to this process of decision making. That's it. So thank you for being attentive.
Thank you, and really interesting results, and I really have the impression that this sociolinguistic turn into neuropragmatics, neurolinguistics in general is a very highly relevant field. I do have a couple of questions, but I leave it to the audience first. Chiara, Pompei.
Thank you. The presentation was very interesting. I was just wondering something about the first experiment for the second in which you manipulate the speaker name. So
The Russians and
yeah, I was thinking whether it
Do I,
would
do I need to go? I don't know if I should go all the way to some
Yeah,
slide.
maybe it's not necessary, we can.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I was thinking, it is possible to, be more confident in attributing this kind of results to a positive stereotype toward the population. Because I have the doubt that, for example, probably I know that I have some more linguistic bias, in the sense that, for example, I accept more neologism also from Italian people using English words, while I wouldn't, accept a lot of, words in Italian from other languages. So I was thinking, could it be possible that is a more specific linguistic bias towards English? Maybe trying to, use, I don't know, an English from London speaker and an American.
We could try it, but they were using like a proper Hebrew word that are many of them were very high register. Like the equivalent of feline I don't know in Italian, so I don't know. But this is not, it's just a word that it's weird for people to know, I think, for some of the cases. I mean, sure. I also need to check for the British stereotypes just to make sure that they're not as positive.
And if I can, about the question that you used, how it's likely that this person is autistic. Not to the fact that it would be a little bit weird for me to answer a question like this, but I think maybe it's probably because I remember the distribution, it was like, okay, common word, lower rate of autism stuff, but you have this kind of, I wouldn't say randomic, but probably people dealing with uncertainty. Because
Yeah, it's
people
more
are not-
flat.
Yeah, because they're not clinically trained to diagnose something.
Mhm.
But maybe using
I agree with you, and we stopped using that question because we feel uncomfortable with
I
that.
think it's interesting to say something like maybe how is that this person has some kind of mental health, because I think that we rely a lot on language
Mhm.
to judge
Yeah.
someone mental health in general, not with the yes, I think it would be interesting to children do this a lot when other children use more difficult words, they start to laugh on them, and so I think that maybe it would be, a viable route to understand whether how much we rely on certain linguistic aspects to judge.
Yeah.
Yes.
I agree, and that's why we use this question to begin with. But now we are not sure about it, so I think we stopped using it. But we are looking for other questions, so to ask to replace it, so.
Yeah, maybe more general, because it's like a diagnosis,
Yeah, just one specific.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions?
I have a very general question. And my question is whether you think that the results you had from your experiment are sensitive in an interesting way to language variation, and where in language variation would the difference be relevant, namely between at least lexicon and syntax.
So you're asking if we'll see something different with syntax?
Yes, if there is room for that, because there may be not.
I don't know, so we try to do a similar thing with the adjective ordering preferences, which are in between semantics and syntax. People are arguing about it. I know. We haven't done the sentence level yet. But for the adjective ordering, it was really hard for people to learn to associate a speaker with, and in general, for syntax, it's harder to show this association. So some studies do show learning and some others don't. So I think it's probably relevant, but it's harder to learn. So we just need to find the right design to make people learn, and then.
Yes, I think that the most promising way to test adjective ordering is Chiquist's kind of hierarchies. Since you started with an arrow, you probably have been exposed to some.
Yeah, we tested it. We actually tested this in Hebrew, and in Hebrew, it's not so robust. So I think if we had tested the adjective ordering in English, maybe we could find
Well, actually,
differences.
consider that if you test adjective ordering, in Northern Italian versus Southern Italian, you do have differences. In that fact, micro variation in the sense of gain would be irrelevant. Because you might find very small groups where you have consistent hierarchies in adjective. And that would be interesting to see the kind of predictions that you have are sensitive to the hierarchical ordering and achievement. Another case which would be, I can't find an immediate kind of results, experiment or stimulus with that, would be with numerals. Because numerals tend to have a specific kind of ordering in different languages. So take, for example, 23 in English and the 21 in German. And it will be kind of interesting to see this typology of ordering makes any reflection when you ask for the number of things in groups.
Yeah.
So, but you see, it's a typical kind of question where the most interesting thing is to ask you whether you expect language differences to be relevant to the results.
So I think that it will be. I think it's just harder to detect.
But that's
So, right, like it's
it's
interesting in the sense that maybe if it's harder to detect, it's become irrelevant in the end. But I think that in most cases, when we know people, we are exposed to their language, and we are exposed to the language on a daily basis, then we do have enough data.
yes.
So I don't know. The question is, I don't know what I expect it to be.
Well, actually, one typical interesting case would be to test languages where you have in that Matteo Greco's work would be interesting. Where you have different negation.
Mm-hmm.
That would be very
Yeah.
interesting because the kind of prediction of making implication would be is expected to be different in case you have a high negation or a lower position of negation because of the kind of implication that you have. So, for example, let's say English, French, and German would be the continuum to test whether that would make any difference in the results of the test.
Yeah, we are now also collecting that because we want to do also the syntactic. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question that tries to connect receptive and expressive aspects. Because you show that, convincingly show that pragmatic processes are somehow inhibited, reduced when you're dealing with an outgrowth context. But if you look at another typical illocutionary act that benefits from pragmatic processing, which is persuasion.
Mm-hmm.
This makes things interesting because when you want to persuade, you typically do it towards someone who is an outgrowth. You want to persuade people from groups outside yours.
You mean for a certain view?
Yeah, you want to persuade, for instance, in a campaign, you want to persuade people from another group to vote for your group, and you use more metaphor, more jokes, more pragmatic mechanisms. But the pragmatic processing in that group is refused, and so you have to face a double.
I think we have to realize that, and then maybe stop using it.
We have to speak literally with towards outgrowth.
Possibly. I mean,
it could be modulated. I mean, not just speaker's identity, but also speaker's perlocutionary intention to persuade and not persuade, and see how this impact, not just the identity in group outgrowth.
For sure, there are other factors, right? Also, the type of groups. Like it could be a woman and another. Like I'm a woman and I'm a researcher, right? So it could be those two things together are different to I don't know, if I speak with guys who are researchers or guys who are truck drivers.
Mhm. Yeah, and in addition really to the identity, there could be also the perlocutionary intent that could differently affect the processing yeah. Okay, I think that there's definitely a lot of possible fields of investigation, and so next time you visit Einat, we look forward
Yeah.
to the new findings, but thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.